This week's Flip Side looks at the 6 degrees of separation between people, which seems much smaller when it comes to politicians and political journalists. Maria Slade wrote the column. Maria, what prompted you to write this week?
There's been a bit of chatter on social media about two political pairings. One of them is Jenna Lynch, who's the political editor at News Hub, and her partner, who is the chief of staff for the ACT Party. And then there's Marnie Dunlop, who is the partner of Minister Kiri Allen. This has been known for a while. It's not really a secret in journalistic and political circles, but I think in the run-up to the election, perhaps, people have started to talk about it a bit more. And I started to have a listen to myself to some of Marnie Dunlop's interviews, because she's currently filling in on Morning Report. As we know, Susie Ferguson stepped down a couple of months ago, and that role, that co-presenting role with Corin Dan, is currently open. So Marnie, who's been a long time Radio New Zealand journalist and broadcaster, is currently filling in. And when you listen to some of her interviews with some of the opposition politicians, it doesn't cover her in grace, I don't believe. There was one particular one where she interviewed Christopher Luxon, and she was kind of sighing and talking over him. But then when you hear her interview the Prime Minister seems to get a much easier ride. Certainly there's no deep sighs. So you sort of start to ask yourself, well, does this matter?
Mm-hmm. It can be a bit of a hallmark of journalists, though. Some presenters will harumph like Kim Hill over a lot of people. Is there any particular issue?
Well, that's right. I mean, Kim Hill harumphs at everybody and has done so for years, but I think that's the key. She does it to everybody. And the difference, I think, between Jenna Lynch at News Hub and Marnie Dunlop at Radio New Zealand is, for a start, Lynch's partner is not an elected official. He works for a political party, whereas Kiri Allen is an elected cabinet minister. And Marnie Dunlop is working for the state broadcaster. This is a taxpayer-funded broadcaster. So I think there's a distinction there. And I think it matters in election year, definitely. And I think it's bad optics for the broadcaster. You know, it's nothing new. We've had people like Jane Clifton, the very respected political commentator who was first married to Murray McCulley and then later, now she's married to Trevor Mallard. And everybody knew that. But Jane was always, felt the ability to be able to lambast and lampoon anybody for anything, and it didn't seem to hold her back. I think when you start to get instances like Dunlop perhaps being overly critical of Chris Luxon and giving Jacinda Ardern an easier ride in an election year on the state broadcaster, I think perhaps that's a question. So it'll be interesting to see what Radio New Zealand does with that role. As we know, it's up for grabs. So what are they going to do?
So there's a conflict of interest, or a perceived conflict of interest. How should this be declared?
That's what some people are saying, that fine, go ahead, fill your boots, but declare your interest. And, perhaps that could be done. I still think, though, that in the run-up to an election, would we have Marnie Dunlop interviewing Kiri Allen on the national broadcaster? I can't see that working. So would they have to recuse her? Then how far does that go? Do they have to recuse her from interviewing other opposition politicians? It would be kind of a bit, not very practical, I imagine. But, again, it could be done perhaps if they declared their interest. But I think in the context of the wider RNZ-TVNZ merger, this is pretty interesting because you're already merging two completely different cultures. You've got TVNZ that's producing, low-life reality TV shows like F-Boy Island. I'm sorry, low-life is my opinion of it. And then you've got the state broadcaster still conducting worthy interviews with cabinet ministers, in the mornings over your cereal. So how do you reconcile those two anyway? And, perhaps a broadcaster that's a bit grumpy at opposition politicians is kind of the least of their problems. This is all yet to be worked out.